What is it with fetishizing these sports heroes? What is with a month of mourning for Kobe Bryant? I just
Hmm.
don't understand this nonsense.
Well, the people become fanboys. It's like I see people arguing about Michael Jordan versus whoever else as the greatest basketball player of all time, and most of the time people are wrong. Uh, I've told you how like I've been on that Quora site for a few months. I keep going to it simply to read the cat stories and the pet stories and the dog stories, simply because they're the only place where you can read some positive stories about something. But I see people constantly talking about, oh, no one's better than Shakespeare, and I'm so tired of hearing that. Or the Beatles. No one's better than the Beatles. I saw a recent post, for example, about Led Zeppelin. And I found out there's a good new rock band called Greta Van Fleet that has a very Led Zeppelin-like sound, and they're much better than most rock of the last 30 years. That guys in their early 20s and whatnot, and yet people are slagging on them. Oh, they could never be Led Zeppelin. Yet these are the same people who will say Led Zeppelin can never compete with the Beatles, or that Led Zeppelin, was a ripoff of the blues artists, which they were in a sense. They did something different with it, and people just get these really insane ideas, and it all has to do with celebrity. We want to identify with the Beatles. When I say we, I don't mean me specifically, but as culturally, we want to identify with this actor. We want to identify with the Marvel universe, and there's another thing I see on this Quora and other sites. People arguing about, can Superman beat up Hulk or something? It's like, who cares? And yet, the funniest thing though is a lot of these people are people that claim to have degrees in engineering, and I'm a 47-year-old architectural engineer, and I'm writing not I forget about Superman and Hulk. They're two of the most famous comic book superheroes around. But oh, this is Mr. The Blue Wonder versus shit eating girl. And it's like, so you've got like seventh rate characters in a juvenile quote unquote art form, and yet these people we talk about, that episode where shit eating girl, came out as bisexual, that really resonated with me. Are you kidding me? I mean, are you kidding me? Some minor this, and yet you read a book like this one that I just wrote, only 75,000 words. I will tell you this much: if you took every comic book printed in America for the last 80 years, from Superman and Batman's debuts onward, there is more real art, more depth in this one 75,000 word book than in all of those comic books combined. In all of them combined, it's the same ridiculous tropes and whatnot. But these people love cliches. This is why you have all these sports fans. This is why, no one will ever be like Wayne Gretzky. Well, people before Wayne Gretzky came along, no one will ever be like Bobby Orr. No one will ever be like Maurice Richard. No one will ever be like so and so. People just like to bullshit and say this kind of stupid stuff, and there's nothing that can be done about it. There's nothing that can be done about it. Like I said, uh, just I mentioned this rock band Greta Van Fleet. I was listening to some of their songs, and their harder rocking songs are better than their slower songs. And these are 22-year-old guys. In 4 or 5 years, they might put out 3 or 4 more albums. That'll be good. And yet people will totally miss it because they want to be snobs, and yet they don't even have the ability to actually say why Led Zeppelin was great, much less why they were better or not better than the Beatles or whatnot. And these pointless arguments. And you just look at, if you were to look at the total mass of
Well,
stuff that's been written
I think
online in the
there's,
hold on,
I
hold on,
think
hold on,
there's,
hold on, hold on. In the last
okay.
20 years, if you looked at the whole mass of what's been written online, I mean, literally, people waste. I mean, how many man hours can people waste just with their navel gazing? But human beings are social animals. They want to navel gaze. They want to waste time. Fuck them.
An interesting synchronicity with this Greta Van Fleet band is I've never heard of these people either, but one of the band members is named Danny Wagner, and
It is
yes, Danny Wagner is a member of Greta Van Fleet.
really. I know that there's like three brothers, Cisco or something like that.
Three brothers and a guy named Danny Wagner.
Well, there you go, synchronicity. Yeah, I didn't. I mean, I looked up, the albums on YouTube. I didn't look up much about the band except, and it's funny too because the people who don't like this group, they keep calling the lead singer Jake Sisko or whatever his name is, Siska, or Joe Sisko, whoever it is. They keep calling him a little homunculus and whatnot. And yet these same people will turn around and they'll talk about a singer like, I don't know how much you know about rock music, but there's a singer named Ronnie Dio, and
Mhm.
he was actually in a band called Elf. Then he was in Black Sabbath. He released his own stuff. Then he was in Deep Purple, became solo. He recently died a couple of years ago. He was constantly fighting with Ozzy Osbourne, the original Black Sabbath singer, and and the same people who would praise Dio, who was like 5'2", rip on this kid for being a dwarf because he's 5'4" or something. And it's like, who gives a shit? And who gives a shit if he's aping Robert Plant to a degree? I can tell you, having listened to, having about 4 or 5 songs of the 2 albums they've released so far, I can tell you that they've written about things that Led Zeppelin never wrote about. Yes, they have that sound, but they're young. If you listen to Led Zeppelin, like I said, they were obviously influenced by blues musicians from 20, 30 years before. Influence doesn't make someone good or bad. And then I read some articles, they would have like 12 bands better than Greta Van Fleet. So I'd listen to the linked YouTube videos and I say, these are utterly generic. So these are just people who don't like the fact that this Greta Van Fleet sounds like Led Zeppelin and their singer is a short guy that they don't like. And so let's Sally and the shit bricks. They're much more like Led Zeppelin than this Greta Van Fleet. No, they're not. No, they're not. I mean, do you actually listen to this shit?
I
But
I have a question regarding some bands because I know that you're gearing up to write a third musical. I think the 21st century music.
yeah,
Would this be one band that you would include? And
yes, there's one.
what are the other good bands that you would include?
Well, off the top of my head, there are 2 that come to mind. I interviewed. I don't know if you. I know. I interviewed this kid, this musician, a couple of months ago in December. A local Texas musician, Joey. The fuck was his name? I can't remember. But he's 2 or 3 interviews ago as we record this now, um, and he was playing a song by this guy named Hozier, this Irish guy.
Yeah.
And so one of the Hozier songs I'll probably use. I don't remember the name of it, and then I'll probably use this Greta Van Fleet song called "When the Curtain Falls" because it has a very Hollywood Sunset Boulevard feel to it. It's about a guy approaching a movie star asking for autographs and sort of finding the Hollywood star not what he really thought she was. And so it's interesting. Again, that's something that's totally unlike what Led Zeppelin would have written about, but it's a damn good song. Is it the greatest rock song ever? No, but it's so much better than the boy band crap that's been out there. But anyway, to bring this all back to the novel, this you Gorgeous George was an important cultural figure, or at least a pop cultural figure, in the middle of the 20th century. I mean, literally, according to many sources that I found online and from what I knew growing up as a kid, he was the he was the most popular athlete from about 1947 to about 1954, 55. For almost a decade running. He was the highest paid athlete, if you want to consider pro wrestling an athletic sport. He was the highest paid athlete, and he was the most well known. He was a bigger name than Joe DiMaggio at the time. And really, pro football wasn't that big then. Hockey was in just 6 cities, and they weren't that big. Pro basketball was just getting started then; they weren't that big. So it was really just who was the biggest name baseball player of the time. From the late 40s to 51 or 52 when he retired. Joe DiMaggio was, here's to you, Joe DiMaggio, where have you gone? The Simon Garfunkel. He was a pop cultural icon. But Gorgeous George, in a sense, was even bigger. And now he's almost totally forgotten because there's no pretense that that pro wrestling is a sport. But that doesn't mean that he didn't have an effect. And like I said, it gives a nice little insight because here are 2 people that are not that bright, 2 people that are not that gifted. Other than Gorgeous George's ability to put on a show and have his little tics where he's spraying himself with perfume and throwing out his bobby pins from his hair. He'd just be a guy at a beer factory otherwise, and yet he wasn't, and that's interesting to a certain degree. So I don't know.
One thing I wanted to mention before we finished with the novel is that I thought it was a bit Steinbeckian too, in that many of the big events of the world at the time were in the background, sort of the same way that the Grapes of Wrath had the Great Depression in the background. We focus mostly on the Jodes, and then the sides on things like the turtle.
Yeah.
So I thought that was an interesting touch as well.
Yeah, and again, there were probably dozens of influences. There were probably things that came to me, little things. I don't know, having Betty look outside of a bus. Or I think there's one scene that I remember. She's at the bottom of a hill coming out of a drugstore, and I think at the top of the hill there's a church, or maybe it's the reverse or something. And I forget why she's looking up there, but there's a nice little scene of her talking about the people going to church, and she's coming out of a drugstore or something.
Maybe I should have been an architect.
Yeah, something like that. And it's to me it's a nice little touch. So anyway.
Okay, so cut there.
Yeah, let me yeah.